The sun rose slowly over the small town of Maplewood, casting a golden glow on its sleepy streets. It was one of those mornings where everything seemed calm, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Mr. Elijah Johnson sat on the porch of his modest home, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. At 72 years old, he had earned every wrinkle etched into his face and every gray hair that dotted his head. Life hadn't been easy for him, but he carried himself with dignity, always wearing a warm smile that made people feel at ease. Elijah loved this time of day. The air smelled fresh, like earth after rain, and the birds chirped cheerfully in the trees lining his street. He enjoyed watching the neighborhood come alive, the children walking to school, the mail carrier waving hello, and the occasional car passing by. This little corner of Maplewood felt like home, even though it hadn't always treated him kindly. Over the years, Elijah had learned to ignore the sideways glances and muttered comments about his kind moving into the area. He chose kindness instead, believing that love could soften even the hardest hearts. Today, however, something felt different. As Elijah leaned back in his rocking chair, he noticed two police cruisers parked further down the block. Their presence wasn't unusual. Officers often patrolled the neighborhood to keep things safe, but there was something uneasy about how they lingered near Mrs. Thompson's house, their engines idling as if waiting for something or someone. Curiosity got the better of Elijah, so he set his mug down and stood up, brushing off the front of his sweater. His knees creaked slightly as he walked toward the fence separating his yard from the sidewalk. Before he could call out to ask what was happening, one of the officers stepped out of his vehicle. Officer Grayson was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore mirrored sunglasses that hid his eyes. He moved with an air of authority, but Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Morning," Elijah said politely, leaning against the fence. His voice was steady, though his instincts told him to tread carefully. Officer Grayson didn't return the greeting. Instead, he gestured vaguely toward Elijah's yard. "Sir, we've received reports of suspicious activity around here.
Howdy do.
You mind if we take a look?" "Suspicious activity?" Elijah frowned, glancing around. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just his garden tools neatly stacked against the shed and some potted plants sitting on the porch. "Still?" he nodded.
Right.
"Go ahead," he replied, keeping his tone light. "I've got nothing to hide."
Out.
The officers began poking around his property. Elijah watched them closely. They opened the shed door, peered inside, and rifled through his belongings without asking permission. One officer picked up a rusty wrench and turned it over in his hands, as if inspecting it for evidence. Another rummaged through a box of old photographs and letters, scattering them carelessly on the ground. Elijah clenched his fists but forced himself to stay calm. "Is all this really necessary?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "I'm just an old man trying to enjoy my morning." Grayson shot him a cold look. "We're doing our job, sir." "You'd do well to cooperate." The word stung. Not because they were harsh, but because Elijah recognized the underlying tone, mix of condescension and prejudice that he'd encountered far too many times in his life. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that anger wouldn't solve anything. Yet, as the minutes dragged on, his patience grew thinner. Finally, the officers finished their search, or rather, their invasion, and returned to their cars. Just as Elijah thought the ordeal was over, Grayson approached him again, holding up a small pocket knife he'd found in the shed. "This yours?" he demanded. Elijah blinked in confusion. "Yes, it is. I use it for gardening." "Is that a problem?" Grayson smirked, exchanging a glance with his partner. "Carrying a concealed weapon is against the law, sir. I'm afraid you'll have to come with us." Elijah's heart sank. He wanted to argue, to explain that the knife wasn't concealed and certainly not intended as a weapon. But before he could say another word, Grayson grabbed his arm roughly and began leading him toward the cruiser. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, whispering among themselves, while Elijah struggled to maintain his composure. As the car door slammed shut behind him, Elijah stared out the window at the home he'd built with his own hands. For decades, he'd worked hard to provide for his family, to raise his son with values of respect and integrity. And now, here he was, being hauled away like a criminal for no reason other than the color of his skin. Little did the officers know. Elijah's son, Marcus Johnson, had recently been appointed as the new police chief of Maplewood. Marcus had spent years climbing the ranks, determined to bring change to a system riddled with bias and corruption. When news of his father's arrest reached him later that day, it would ignite a firestorm neither Grayson nor anyone else in the department could have anticipated. For now, hope that justice would prevail. Hope that his son would make things right. Hope that someday the world might see him not as a threat, but as a man worthy of respect. Across town, Marcus Johnson sat in his newly assigned office at the Maplewood Police Department. The room was modest, but functional. A sturdy wooden desk, cluttered with files, a framed photo of him and his father on one corner, and a stack of policy manuals he hadn't yet had time to read. Outside the window, the late morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. It was a quiet day so far, which gave Marcus a rare moment to breathe after weeks of relentless work transitioning into his role as police chief at 38 years old. Marcus had earned this position through sheer determination and an unyielding commitment to justice. Growing up, he'd watched his father face countless injustices, both big and small, and it had shaped him profoundly. Elijah's resilience taught Marcus the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity, while also showing compassion to others. Now, as the first black police chief in Maplewood's history, Marcus carried that legacy with pride, knowing the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders. The phone rang just as Marcus reached for his coffee cup. He picked it up quickly, expecting another routine call about traffic accidents or noise complaints, but when he heard the voice on the other end, his blood ran cold. "Chief Johnson," came the hesitant greeting. It was Officer Ramirez, one of the younger recruits, who admired Marcus's leadership. "Sir, I think you need to hear this." "What is it?" Marcus asked, his tone calm but laced with concern. "It's your father, sir," Ramirez replied, hesitating again. "He's been arrested." For a moment, Marcus froze, his hand gripping the receiver tightly. Trying to make sense of the words. His father, Elijah Man, who wouldn't hurt a fly, arrested. It didn't add up. "On what charges?" Marcus demanded, his voice sharper now. "Apparently they found a pocket knife in his shed," Ramirez explained. "They're claiming it's a concealed weapon violation." Marcus let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. A pocket knife used for gardening? This wasn't negligence. It was something far worse. He knew exactly what this was, a symptom of the systemic bias he'd vowed to dismantle when he took the job. Still, hearing that his own father had fallen victim to it cut deeper than he'd expected. "Who made the arrest?" Marcus asked, already dreading the answer. "Officer Grayson and his partner, Sir," Ramirez said quietly. "I'm sorry, Chief. I thought you should know before it gets out." Marcus thanked Ramirez and hung up the phone, his mind spinning. He stared at the photograph of him and his father sitting on the desk. In the picture, they were smiling, arms around each other during Marcus's graduation from the police academy. Elijah had been so proud that day, beaming with pride as he pinned the badge onto Marcus's uniform. And now, less than 24 hours into Marcus's tenure as chief, his father was sitting in a cell because of someone else's prejudice. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing the length of the office. He needed to act, but how? If he charged into the situation blindly, demanding answers and throwing his authority around, people would accuse him of favoritism. On the other hand, if he stayed silent, it would look like he condoned such behavior. Either way, the scrutiny would be intense. For a moment, doubt crept in. Could he really handle this? Was he ready to lead? No, he couldn't afford to doubt himself. Not now. Taking a deep breath, Marcus grabbed his jacket and headed out of the office. As he walked down the hallway, officers glanced up briefly before returning to their tasks. None of them seemed aware of the storm brewing inside him more. Perhaps they simply didn't care. Marcus clenched his jaw and kept moving. When he arrived at the holding area, the sight of his father sitting on a bench in the dimly lit cell nearly broke him. Elijah looked tired, his usually warm eyes clouded with resignation. Despite everything, he managed a small smile when he saw Marcus approaching. "Hey, son," he said softly. "Didn't expect to see you here today." Marcus forced himself to smile back, though his heart ached. "Dad, what happened?" Elijah shrugged, leaning forward slightly. "Nothing much. It's just some misunderstanding with those officers. They found a little knife I use for pruning roses, and suddenly I'm public enemy number one." Marcus nodded, his jaw tightening. He turned to the duty officer standing nearby. "Can we speak privately?" he asked, gesturing toward the interrogation room. Once inside, Marcus closed the door behind them and faced his father. This isn't right, Dad. I'm going to fix this." Elijah placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Son, don't go making waves over me. You've got a tough road ahead as it is. Don't let them drag you down too." But Marcus shook his head firmly. "No, Dad. This isn't just about you. It's bigger than that. If I don't stand up, now nothing will ever change." With renewed resolve, Marcus left the room and sought out Captain Harris, the department's second in command. Harris was a seasoned officer with decades of experience, but he was also known for turning a blind eye to misconduct among his team. When Marcus entered his office, Harris looked up from his paperwork, raising an eyebrow. "Chief, what brings you here?" "I want to review the details of my father's arrest," Marcus said bluntly, cutting straight to the point. "Every report, every statement, right now?" Harris blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Your father—" "Look, Chief, I understand. You're upset, but these things happen. Sometimes mistakes are made." "This isn't a mistake," Marcus interrupted, his voice low but firm. "You and I both know it. So either you help me get to the bottom of this, or I'll do it myself. Your choice." Harris hesitated, then sighed heavily. "All right, Chief. Let's take a look." As Marcus reviewed the documents, anger simmered. Beneath the surface, the entire case reeked of bias, from the vague suspicious activity report to the exaggerated claim about the pocket knife. By the time he finished reading, Marcus knew exactly what he needed to do next. This wasn't just about clearing his father's name. It was about sending a message to the entire department and to the community that change was coming. Whether they liked it or not, and Marcus was ready to fight for it. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on Marcus's shoulders as he left Captain Harris's office. The evidence or lack thereof against his father was flimsy at best, yet it had been enough to justify an arrest. To Marcus, this wasn't just a personal issue. It was a glaring example of the systemic problems he'd vowed to address when he became police chief. He couldn't let this slide, not for his father's sake, and certainly not for the sake of the community that looked to him for leadership. As Marcus walked back toward the holding area, his mind raced with plans. He needed to tread carefully. If he acted too aggressively, people might accuse him of playing favorites. But if he didn't act decisively, it would send the wrong message that some officers could continue abusing their power without consequences. Balancing justice and fairness wouldn't be easy. But Marcus knew one thing for certain: silence wasn't an option. When he reached the cell where Elijah sat, Marcus took a deep breath before stepping inside. His father looked up, his expression calm despite the circumstances. "You didn't have to come down here yourself," Elijah said gently. "I can handle this." Marcus shook his head, pulling up a chair to sit across from his father. "No, Dad, you shouldn't have to handle this. It's my job now, to make sure everyone is treated fairly, including you." Elijah studied his son's face, seeing the determination etched into every line. "Just promise me you won't lose yourself over this," he said finally. "I've seen what happens when good men try to fight battles they can't win. Don't let them break you." "I won't," Marcus replied firmly, though inwardly he wondered if he was making promises he couldn't keep. "But I'm not backing down either." After ensuring his father was comfortable, Marcus returned to his office. There he began drafting a formal request for an internal investigation into the arrest. It was a bold move, especially so early in his tenure, but Marcus knew it was necessary. He included every detail he'd uncovered during his review of the case, highlighting inconsistencies and questionable actions by Officers Grayson and his partner. By the time he finished, the document was thorough and damning. Before submitting the request, Marcus called a meeting with his senior staff. The conference room buzzed with murmurs as officers filed in, curious about why the new chief had summoned them on such short notice. When Marcus entered, the room fell silent. He stood at the head of the table, his posture commanding attention. "I want to start by saying how proud I am to lead this department," Marcus began, his voice steady. "We have a responsibility to protect and serve our community with integrity. But today, I've learned of an incident that undermines everything we stand for." He went on to explain the situation, carefully avoiding emotional language while sticking to the facts. As he spoke, he noticed varying reactions around the room. Some officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Captain Harris, seated near the corner, avoided eye contact altogether. "This isn't about me or my family," Marcus continued. "It's about accountability. If we don't hold ourselves to the highest standards, how can we expect the public to trust us? That's why I'm launching an internal investigation into this matter. I expect full cooperation from everyone involved." The room erupted into quiet whispers, but Marcus raised a hand to silence them. "Let me be clear. This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame prematurely. It's about getting to the truth. And if anyone has concerns about misconduct within this department, now's the time to speak up." When the meeting ended, Marcus felt a mix of relief and apprehension. He'd taken the first step, but he knew the road ahead would be difficult. Word of his decision spread quickly through the department, sparking heated debates among the officers. Some supported Marcus, praising his commitment to transparency. Others, however, saw his actions as a threat, a challenge to the status quo they were unwilling to change. Later that evening, as Marcus drove home, his phone buzzed with a text from Officer Ramirez. "Chief, I heard rumors Grayson's planning to file a complaint against you? Be careful," Marcus sighed, gripping the steering wheel tighter. He'd expected resistance, but threats? This was escalating faster than he'd anticipated. Still, he refused to back down. For his father? For his community? For the future of the department? And deep down, Marcus knew he was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, the Maplewood Police Department buzzed with tension. News of Marcus's decision to launch an internal investigation had spread, like wildfire, dividing the officers into two camps. Some admired his courage and saw it as a step toward reform, while others viewed it as an attack on their authority. Among them, Officer Grayson fumed silently, his jaw clenched as he sat at his desk reviewing patrol schedules. He couldn't believe the new chief, barely a week into the job, was already undermining him. Grayson wasn't one to back down from a fight. With years of seniority under his belt, he prided himself on being untouchable. To him, Marcus's actions weren't about accountability. They were personal. After all, how dare this new guy question his judgment? Determined to protect his reputation, Grayson decided to strike first. He drafted a formal complaint against Marcus, accusing him of favoritism and misconduct for initiating the investigation without sufficient evidence. By lunchtime, the document was on Captain Harris's desk, along with copies sent directly to the mayor's office. Meanwhile, Marcus remained focused on the task at hand. He spent hours poring over reports, interviewing witnesses, and gathering statements from neighbors who had seen Elijah's arrest unfold. Many were hesitant to speak up, fearing retaliation, but Marcus assured them that their voices mattered. Slowly, a clearer picture began to emerge, one that painted Grayson and his partner in an increasingly negative light. As Marcus worked, he received unexpected support from unlikely allies. Officer Ramirez, though nervous about drawing attention to himself, volunteered to assist with the investigation. "I joined this force because I wanted to help people," Ramirez admitted quietly during one of their late-night meetings. "If we don't fix what's broken, no one will." Marcus appreciated the gesture more than he could express. Having someone trustworthy by his side made the overwhelming workload feel slightly more manageable. Together, they uncovered inconsistencies in Grayson's initial report, including exaggerated claims about Elijah's behavior and selective omissions that skewed the narrative, but not everyone was supportive. Rumors swirled through the department, fueled by those loyal to Grayson. Some whispered that Marcus was using his position to shield his father from consequences, while others accused him of trying to tear apart the department for political gain. These accusations stung, but Marcus refused to let them distract him. Instead, he channeled his frustration into action, determined to prove that justice wasn't about power, it was about fairness. Outside the department, news of Elijah's arrest reached the community. Word traveled quickly in Maplewood, especially among its black residents, many of whom had experienced similar injustices firsthand. For years, they'd felt powerless against a system that seemed stacked against them. But now, with Marcus leading the charge, hope began to flicker. A small group of activists organized a peaceful protest outside the police station, holding signs that read "Justice for Elijah Johnson" and "Accountability starts now." Marcus noticed the crowd when he arrived early one morning. As he stepped out of his car, applause erupted, catching him off guard. He raised a hand in acknowledgement, feeling both humbled and overwhelmed. One woman approached him, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Chief," she said softly. "For so long, we've been waiting for someone to stand up for us. Please don't give up." Her words stayed with Marcus throughout the day, fueling his resolve. Later that evening, he visited his father again, bringing updates on the investigation. Elijah listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. "You're doing good work, son," he said finally. "But remember, change doesn't come easy. People are scared of it. They'll try to stop you every step of the way." "I know, Dad," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "But if I don't do this now, when will it happen? We deserve better not." "Just us, but everyone," Elijah nodded, pride shining in his eyes. "Then keep going. Just promise me you'll stay safe." That night, as Marcus reviewed the growing pile of evidence, he realized something important. This wasn't just about Elijah anymore. It was about setting a precedent, a line in the sand that declared no one, not even the police, was above accountability. And though the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, Marcus knew he couldn't turn back now. Little did he know, Grayson's complaint had already reached the mayor's office, sparking a heated debate behind closed doors. The pressure was mounting, and Marcus would soon face a choice that would test everything he stood for. The following morning, Marcus arrived at the police station to find an envelope waiting on his desk. It was marked urgent in bold letters, and inside was a formal summons from Mayor Thompson requesting an immediate meeting. Marcus's stomach tightened as he read the letter. He had anticipated pushback, but not this soon, or this directly. Still, he knew avoiding the issue would only make things worse. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed his jacket and headed to City Hall. Mayor Thompson's office was spacious and well lit, with large windows overlooking the town square. When Marcus entered, the mayor was seated behind her polished oak desk, flanked by 2 city council members. Their expressions were unreadable, but the tension in the air was palpable. "Chief Johnson," Mayor Thompson began, gesturing for him to sit. Her tone was polite but firm. "We've received some concerns regarding your recent actions. Specifically, Officer Grayson has filed a complaint alleging favoritism and misconduct." Marcus nodded calmly, though his heart pounded in his chest. "I understand, ma'am. And I'm prepared to address those concerns. What Officer Grayson calls favoritism, I call accountability. My father's arrest raises serious questions about bias within our department, questions that deserve answers." The mayor exchanged glances with the council members before responding. "While transparency is important, Chief, you must also consider the impact your decisions have on morale and public perception. Some feel you're moving too quickly, especially given your new position." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "With all due respect, ma'am, if we wait for the perfect moment to act, nothing will ever change. This isn't just about my father. It's about ensuring that every citizen in Maplewood is treated fairly under the law. If I don't address these issues now, how can I expect anyone to trust me or this department?" The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. One of the council members cleared his throat. "It's clear you're passionate about reform, Chief Johnson. But passion alone won't shield you from criticism. Are you prepared for the consequences if this investigation uncovers wrongdoing among your officers?" I am, Marcus replied, without hesitation, because ignoring the problem would be far worse. If we want to rebuild trust in this community, we need to start by holding ourselves accountable. That includes me. After a long pause, Mayor Thompson sighed. Very well, Chief. We'll allow the investigation to proceed for now. But I expect regular updates, and I urge you to tread carefully. The last thing we need is more division. Relieved, yet wary, Marcus thanked her and left the office. As he walked back to the station, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. The mayor's reluctance to fully support him meant he'd have to navigate this storm largely on his own. Back at the station, Marcus found Officer Ramirez waiting for him. How did it go? Ramirez asked cautiously. As expected, Marcus replied, setting the summons aside. They're letting the investigation continue, but they're watching closely. Any misstep could cost us everything. Ramirez nodded grimly. What's next? We dig deeper, Marcus said firmly. If Grayson thinks he can intimidate me into backing down, he's wrong. Let's focus on gathering more evidence. Talk to anyone who might have seen something unusual during the arrest. And keep it quiet. We don't need panic spreading through the ranks. As Ramirez left to carry out his instructions, Marcus turned his attention to another pressing matter, the growing protests outside the station. Each day the crowd grew larger, their chants echoing through the streets. While Marcus appreciated their support, he worried about the potential for escalation. He decided to address them personally, hoping to reassure both the protesters and his officers. Standing on the steps of the station, Marcus raised his hands to quiet the crowd. Thank you all for standing with us, he began, his voice carrying over the murmurs. Your voices matter, and I hear you. But let me be clear, justice isn't served through anger or division, it's served through facts and fairness. Trust me to do my job, and I promise I won't stop until the truth comes out. The crowd erupted into applause, and Marcus felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to believe that change might actually be possible, but as he returned to his office, a message from Captain Harris awaited him. Grayson had requested a private hearing to defend himself. Marcus braced himself, knowing this confrontation would test not only his leadership, but also his resolve. The fight for justice was far from over, and neither was Marcus's determination. To see it through, the private hearing took place in a small, windowless conference room at the police station. Marcus sat at the head of the table, flanked by Captain Harris and 2 civilian oversight committee members who had been called in to ensure impartiality. Across from him, Officer Grayson leaned back in his chair, exuding an air of confidence. That made Marcus's jaw tighten. Grayson's partner, Officer Dawson, sat beside him, fidgeting nervously. The room was tense, kind of quiet that felt heavy with unspoken accusations. Marcus opened the proceedings with a calm but firm tone. This hearing has been convened to address the allegations surrounding the arrest of Elijah Johnson and the subsequent complaint filed by Officer Grayson. My goal is to uncover the truth and determine whether proper protocol was followed. Grayson crossed his arms, his expression smug. Chief, let me start by saying I've served this department for over 15 years. I've always acted within the law and upheld my duty to protect Maplewood. What happened with Mr. Johnson was no different. Marcus nodded, keeping his emotions in check. Then let's go through the details. According to your report, you responded to a call about suspicious activity near Mr. Johnson's home. Can you explain what led you to search? His property. Grayson shrugged as if the answer were obvious. We received multiple reports from neighbors claiming they'd seen unusual behavior. When we arrived, Mr. Johnson admitted he owned tools used for gardening, including a pocket knife. Given its potential as a concealed weapon, we deemed it necessary to take action. Marcus glanced down at the documents spread across the table. Yet none of these neighbors have come forward to corroborate those claims. In fact, several residents stated they saw nothing out of the ordinary. How do you explain that discrepancy? Grayson hesitated for the first time, his composure slipping slightly. People are often reluctant to speak up, especially when crimes happen close to home. That doesn't mean the threat wasn't real. Perhaps, Marcus countered evenly, the The threat existed only in your interpretation of the situation. He turned to Dawson. Officer Dawson, can you confirm everything? Officer Grayson just said. Dawson shifted uncomfortably under Marcus's gaze. Oh yes, mostly. But what? Marcus pressed gently. Dawson glanced at Grayson, then looked away. I thought maybe we could have handled things differently. Mr. Johnson didn't. Seemed dangerous. He cooperated fully, even invited us to look around. It just felt unnecessary to escalate it like we did. Grayson shot Dawson a sharp glare, but Marcus seized the moment. So you're saying there may not have been sufficient grounds for arrest? I'm not sure, Dawson stammered. It's complicated, letting the tension hang in the air. Complicated or convenient? Because based on the evidence and lack thereof, appears the arrest was unwarranted. And if that's true, it reflects poorly not only on you both, but on this entire department. Grayson slammed his hand on the table, his patience snapping. You're twisting facts to fit your narrative, Chief. Admit it too. Doing this because he's your father? The room went silent. Marcus locked eyes with Grayson, his voice low but steely. My personal connection to this case is irrelevant. What matters is whether justice was served. If you believe otherwise, prove it. Show me where I've gone wrong. For the first time, Grayson seemed unsure of himself. Captain Harris cleared, his throat breaking the silence. Perhaps we should review the remaining evidence before drawing conclusions. As the hearing continued, Marcus presented witness statements, photographs of the scene, and expert opinions, confirming that Elijah's pocket knife couldn't legally qualify as a concealed weapon. Each piece of evidence chipped away at Grayson's defense until his confidence crumbled entirely when the session ended hours later. Marcus dismissed everyone except Captain Harris. What's your take? Marcus asked, exhaustion creeping into his voice. Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. It's clear Grayson overstepped. But disciplining him won't erase the damage already done to your father, to the community, or to morale within the department. I know, Marcus replied quietly. But accountability is the first step toward rebuilding trust. We can't move forward without it. That evening, Marcus visited his father again. Elijah listened intently as Marcus recounted the day's events. Sounds like you're making progress, Elijah said with a faint smile. It's a start, Marcus admitted. But there's still so much work to do. Elijah placed a hand on his son's shoulder. You're doing more than anyone expected. Just remember why you started this fight, not for me, but for everyone who deserves better. As Marcus left the detention center, he realized the hardest battles lay ahead. Grayson wouldn't go down without a fight, and the backlash from the department and perhaps even the town would test his leadership to its limits. Yet, as he drove home beneath the fading sunset, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Change was never easy, but it was worth fighting for. The days following the hearing were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus worked tirelessly to finalize his report on the investigation, ensuring every detail was meticulously documented. The evidence overwhelmingly supported his conclusion. Elijah's arrest had been unjustified, driven by bias rather than legitimate cause. With this in hand, Marcus presented his findings to Mayor Thompson and the City Council, recommending disciplinary action against officers Grayson and Dawson to his relief and, slight surprise, the mayor agreed. This isn't an easy decision, she admitted during their meeting. But we can't ignore what's right. Officer Grayson will be suspended pending further review, and Officer Dawson will undergo mandatory training on proper protocol and implicit bias. Though it wasn't the outright dismissal Marcus had hoped for, it was a progressive step toward accountability that hadn't seemed possible just weeks earlier. As news of the decision spread, the department reacted with mixed emotions. Officers grumbled about favoritism, while others quietly expressed support for Marcus's efforts. Outside the station, protests began to dwindle as faith in the system slowly returned. Elijah was released later that day, greeted by a small but heartfelt crowd of neighbors and activists who cheered as he walked out of the detention center. Marcus stood beside him, his heart swelling with pride as he watched his father embrace friends and thank well-wishers. For the first time in weeks, Elijah's smile reached his eyes. That evening, father and son sat together on the porch of Elijah's home, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. "You've done good work, son," Elijah said softly. "But don't think this is the end. There's still so much more to do." "I know," Marcus replied, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "This victory doesn't fix everything. It's just one battle in a much larger war." "It's a start," Elijah countered gently. "Sometimes that's all it takes to inspire change." Over the next few months, Marcus threw himself into reforming the department. He implemented new policies aimed at reducing bias, including mandatory diversity training and stricter guidelines for arrests, also created a civilian oversight committee to ensure transparency and accountability. Though resistance lingered among some officers, many began to see the value in Marcus's vision, a police force that truly served everyone. Meanwhile, Elijah became an unexpected symbol of hope in Maplewood. His quiet dignity throughout the ordeal inspired others to share their own stories of injustice, sparking conversations about race, privilege, and equality. Together, Marcus and Elijah attended community meetings, speaking openly about the importance of unity and understanding. One chilly autumn morning, Marcus stood before the entire department during a town hall meeting. The room was packed, just with officers, but with citizens eager to hear what came next. "Change isn't easy," Marcus began, his voice steady. "It requires courage, patience, and trust. But if we commit to doing better, if we hold ourselves accountable, we can build something stronger than ever before." Applause erupted, echoing through the hall. Among the crowd, Elijah nodded approvingly, his pride evident. Marcus knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but for the first time, he felt hopeful. Hopeful that Maplewood could become a place where justice wasn't determined by skin color or power, but by fairness and compassion. As the meeting ended, Marcus stepped outside into the crisp air. The sun broke through the clouds, casting light over the town square. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, feeling the weight of leadership lift just slightly. He glanced back at the station, then toward the horizon. The journey wasn't over, but they were moving forward, and that made all the difference.